If you don't want to hear the intro, you can skip to the stories via the link in the description. It's time for even more reasons to never go outside. This world is a strange one. It's time once again to read some very real and very creepy encounters with strange creatures. There will be skinwalkers, the goatman, and humanoid beasts. Whatever your nightmarish tastes are, there is certainly a creature in these stories that will haunt your waking life. Lock the doors, close the blinds, and do whatever you do that makes you think you're safe. But let me say this, if something twice your size wanted in, there'd be nowhere to run. Halloween is coming up, and I thought, hey, you know what's better than wearing an Elsa costume and being a 30-year-old single male? Why, shirts of course. I made 2 new shirts for you guys and gals. I heart scary stories, and this is my costume. Buying one makes you a complete badass and supports this channel. Get them while they're hot at darknessprevails.org/store. Thanks. Also, I just wanted to ask my most loyal night watchers to help me grow. I ask that as many of you that are willing to share my videos like crazy. Tell the world about Darkness Prevails for Halloween. Let's hit 200,000 subs in record time. Oh, and no worries everyone, I've got a clean bill of health. Now, are you ready to become prey? Number 1. My Goatman Story. Submitted by Skylar. This happened about a month ago. Before I get started though, my name is Skylar, and I'm a boy. I'm 13 years old, and this is the creepiest thing to have ever happened to me. I live in Florence, Kentucky, but I was visiting my brother in Campbellsville, Kentucky, up to 45 hours away. He recently survived cancer, and our father had died. After a divorce between my parents, my brother began living with my grandma. I was over there one night to stay for a week. On my first day, I just settled in and fell asleep relatively quick. The next night, I wasn't so fortunate. The next day, we hung out in the woods and threw sticks while sitting down and listening to stuff on YouTube. At that moment, we started to hear rustling. For a moment, I thought it was something from the YouTube video. A few minutes later, while talking, we heard it again. I turned around and looked behind us, and I froze. My brother turns around as well, then asks me what's wrong. While stuttering, I say, "Look," and point with my hand very shakily to where the thing was. We saw a tall figure up to 6 or maybe even 7 feet tall, on hind legs. It's peeking over my grandma's old shrub. The scary thing is this shrub is huge. In fact, the month before, me and my brother and uncle took it down and had laid it there in the backyard. When it saw that we were looking at it, it popped its head back into the bush. My brother, with worry in his voice, just said, "What? It's just the neighbor's goat." In return, I told him that we should hightail it out of there, but he shook his head. He said that he wanted to go over and check it out. But before he could walk over there, we heard this very weird goat-like noise, but it was far too loud to be from an actual goat. I can't even explain what it sounded like. So he and I booked it out of there as fast as we could. I didn't get very much sleep that night. When I woke up on the 3rd day of my stay, it was the middle of the night, and I heard tapping at my window. It scared the hell out of me. I mean, if anyone heard tapping at their window, a sound that they weren't used to, and in the middle of the night, you could only assume the worst. I woke up my brother, staring at that window. I asked him very quietly to look outside the window with me. There was no way I was going up to that window by myself. We tiptoed it over to the glass, but when we looked outside, there was nothing. It was so foggy, nothing could have been out there. He asked, "Is this about the goat?" I said no with a worried little laugh. We couldn't go back to sleep, so we just started playing some video games. Within the next hour, I forgot all about it. But then a loud crash came from the window. We both jumped from where we were sitting. It was such a loud sound, our hearts had almost stopped. We looked at each other, and I gathered up the courage to go up to the window. When I opened the curtains, I saw that there was a huge crack. That was not there before, I can guarantee you that. But then, after a moment, I saw behind the cracked glass a ram standing on its hind legs. Immediately, I grabbed my brother and took him to the window to see it. But there was nothing there. The next day was quiet. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, but we were both shaken up. But on the 5th and final day, it got bad. It was around 2 in the morning. I was barely awake, but I glanced up at the window from before. and I saw the silhouette of something or someone standing with its hands on the window trying to peek in. Being surrounded by a feeling of fear and surprise was a given. I couldn't take my eyes off of this thing at the window. I prayed that I was just having a vivid nightmare. I couldn't take my eyes off of this thing, and then I noticed that the figure behind the glass had horns. No longer able to hold back, I shot out of bed and woke up my brother. And this time he finally saw the thing. Without a word, he jumps up, looking for something. He goes into my grandpa's room, and I know that he's looking for my grandpa's gun. We both search hastily, and eventually I find it under the bed. My brother ahead of me, we run back to the bedroom. When I make it back, my brother is scared to death. The thing is gone. My brother said before it left, before it just disappeared, it waved at him. At this point, I was just completely tired of this whole mess. I said I'm going to find it, and I ran outside. My brother cried and followed me. This whole time we were both sneaking, but panicking, because my grandma was still asleep, and my grandpa at the time was in the hospital. We slowly walked toward the woods at the edge of the property. We were only a few feet away from that tall bush from before, when something very tall peeked its head out of the top. It was too dark to make out anything but its silhouette. And let me just remind you that this bush was easily 6 or 7 feet tall. When I saw the thing, I jumped, pointed the gun at it, and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. I kept pulling the trigger, but it never fired. Then, wide-eyed, my brother and I stared at the silhouette. What must have been the thing's head, cocked to the side. And that's when we ran back inside, hearts pounding out of our chests. Inside, our grandma was waiting for us. She must have heard us sneaking around before, and she was far from happy to see us holding their gun. That night, we were harshly scolded and reminded that guns weren't toys. We tried to tell her what we saw, and I want to say that she believed us. I mean, stories of the goatman are common around Louisville and Lexington. Anyway, my grandmother told my mom what had happened, and my mom forbade me from going back for a while. That's okay though. I don't want to be close to those woods for a long time. Number 2. The Trail Skinwalker. Submitted by Death546. My name is Paul. I was 15 when this encounter occurred. I was with 2 of my best friends, Matt and Joe. We live in the more rural area of New York. We haven't told this story to anyone, and the 3 of us decided to tell it here. We don't care if you believe us, but we know what we saw, and it will haunt us forever. To be honest, I still have nightmares of this thing, and sleep with a knife not far from my bed. It was a bright night with a full moon, and it was very peaceful. I was at my friend Joe's house, who lives just up the block. Being young teenage boys, you tend to do some dumb things. The trail is right down the road from our street, so we decided that once Joe's mother went to bed, we would sneak out and head to the rail trail. It was approaching midnight when Joe's mother fell asleep. Around the place we live is very wooded, and we have seen coyotes before, so to make us feel safer, we brought airsoft guns, some M88 firecrackers, and a flashlight that could light up something 100 feet away. Airsoft guns hurt and probably could protect us from coyotes, but it would not protect us from what we saw that night. My father had always told me, if you hear crickets and frogs or small creatures, it meant that nothing too dangerous was around. And as we approached the rail trail, we noticed it was full of crickets and frogs chirping. Being the less adventurous and more cautious guy of the crowd, it gave me a sense of security. We began the walk on the trail, the moon lighting our way. We were quiet, listening to the forest around us. About 3/4 of a mile into the walk, we could see the rail trail bridge. As we stepped closer towards it, something darted across the trail about 50 feet ahead. We thought it was just a lone coyote or a deer, because to the right of us is just a giant field of flat land, no trees. It's perfect for grazing deer. We kept walking, and we noticed that the forest went dead silent, and now we could actually hear our breathing and footsteps. We knew something was wrong, but instead of turning around, we went towards the bridge still. At least there was a road nearby with some traffic, so we thought. I've heard coyotes howl before. My friends and I love to listen to them. But this howl was not like any howl I've heard before. What we heard then was deep and sounded almost like a scream. And better yet, the sound had come from behind us. Luckily, it sounded far away. We started to walk faster and could tell that the howl was getting closer to us. By then, the bridge was only 10 feet ahead of us, but we could hear leaves being crushed behind us and twigs being snapped. We stopped in our tracks, frozen with fear. We raised our airsoft guns, and as we turned around, there was a black figure 20 feet or so behind us. What I noticed first about it was its bright yellow eyes. Matt, having the flashlight, said it was just a coyote. He turned on the light and pointed it at the creature. What I saw was like no creature I'd ever seen before. It stood up on 2 legs and was about 7 feet tall with grayish fur. Its arms and legs were huge, and its hands had long claws at the ends. Its face was almost like a human or dog, with pointed ears, and we could hear it growling at us. Its bright yellow eyes are still burned into my mind. Suddenly, this creature let out a blood-curdling roar, and we could see its sharp, pointed teeth all the way from where we were. My friend Matt, although terrified, lit 3 M88s and threw them at the creature. As Matt threw the firecrackers, we ran towards the bridge. We heard the firecrackers go off, and it must have startled the creature, because we didn't see the thing coming up the bridge. In the large field, we could see a black mass running towards us, and I've never seen any creature move so fast. The bridge is over a busy road, but 10 cars pass under it every hour, and we could see headlights on the road. We bolted off the bridge and onto the road in front of the car. The car stopped, and the driver got out yelling at us. And then we all heard the same blood-curdling howl at the top of the bridge, and we could see those bright yellow eyes. The driver somehow knew what it was and hurried us into his car. We didn't know the guy. It was creepy, but it wasn't as creepy as the thing outside. Inside, he explained to us that this thing was a Skinwalker. He told us that we are lucky to be alive. He took us home, and as I looked at my friends, our faces were paralyzed with fear. No one spoke for the whole ride. As we approached Joe's house, the man looked at us. He didn't say anything, he just stared at us like we were aliens from a different planet. We stepped out of the car and ran back into Joe's house. We locked every single door and window and blocked Joe's bedroom door with everything we could. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. After this experience, I haven't been on the trail since, and I don't plan on ever going back. Matt, Joe, and I haven't spoken about this encounter until now. Now I'm 18, but I know that Skinwalker is still lurking around. I want to move and get the hell out of this town. I'm just glad we made it out of that night, alive. Number 3. Samodiva of Bulgaria. Submitted by Alexander. I am from Bulgaria, which is in the Balkans in Europe. Bulgarians have a forest spirit. We call them Samodiva. They are human-like, usually wearing a white cloak or dress. They are armed with the bow and arrow they use to catch their human prey, and they appear in the mountains. My story begins with a party in a small village in the mountains. We were very wasted, and we were having a good time. It was around 11 o'clock at night. At one point, an old woman told us not to go out at night here. Apparently, it wasn't safe around these parts at night. But we were hot-headed young guys. We decided to grab the horses and do a night stroll to the nearby village, where our girlfriends were sleeping. We left and arrived at the village. We had our fun and decided to go back to our cabin. Me and a friend of mine were on the biggest horse, which weighed about 1,000 kilograms, or 2,200 pounds. In the middle of the road, the horse just stops and wouldn't move. For the record, it was 3 in the morning by this time. We got off the back of the animal and started pulling and pushing. We even got some grass for it to try to get it to move. It was pointless. We decided to take a break and have a smoke some 20 meters away, where there were some benches for picnics. As we lit our cigarettes, we started hearing strange noises, human-like noises. There were laughs and voices. All of a sudden, I saw a beautiful woman in a white cloak looking right at me. She smiled, and I started looking around. There were more of them just staring at us. I told my friend and we got up. We were both very, very scared. Freaked out as we were, we ran to the horse, got on its back, and galloped out of there. At home, we left our horse and saw the old woman standing outside the stable door. I was scared and took out a knife from the nearby rack, but at the corner of my eye, I saw that the mane and the tail of the horse had been braided. I looked at the woman and she said, "I told you not to go out. Now they will come after you because you've seen them." I didn't need anything more to be said. I got in my car, my friend got our baggage in the trunk and jumped in. and I drove as fast as I could. As we left the village, we entered the same forest as before. I was driving at about 80 miles per hour. Just as we left the forest, I turned my head, and I saw them again. 5 or 6 women with white dresses staring at us. Needless to say, I never came back to that place. Number 4. Green Humanoid Winged Creature. Submitted by Sev3617. This happened many years ago when I was about 12. I lived in the woods outside of New Holland on Welsh Mountain, in a rather large house that had a relatively long driveway from the house to the main road. It was in the dead of night, and I was sleeping in my room, which was on the first floor of the house. The room I slept in was quite small. It was about 14 feet long and 8 feet wide. My bed at the time was a futon, and it was placed against the back wall, and directly above my bed on the wall was one of the 2 windows that my room had. It was this window that my experience wouldn't have occurred without. Anyway, as I was sleeping, I had suddenly awoken from a deep sleep, and then I heard a very sudden, loud sound, which I can only describe as what sounded like wings flapping, almost how you would imagine a pterodactyl would sound taking off if you were up close. And as I awoke, I looked up toward the window that was above me, and what I saw was deeply disturbing, though at the moment it didn't particularly startle me, which was strange because back then I was the type of kid that scared very easily at the sight and sound of anything remotely scary or unsettling. But what I saw was what appeared to be a very large, green, winged humanoid figure that had appeared to have just taken flight from atop of one of the large trees that were just across the driveway from outside of my window. I only saw it for about 4 seconds as it flew about 20 to 30 feet or so before disappearing out of sight. I shrugged it off and tried to go back to sleep. But during these 4 seconds or so, I could very clearly make out many of the creature's bodily features. The moon was out and bright that night. As this thing had taken flight, it was directly below where the moonlight was in terms of my field of view, and because of this, I could see the light shine through the creature's wings, to which I saw many of the creature's blood vessels, or at the very least, what looked like blood vessels. The wings themselves were tan, and they span out across its arms the same way a pterodactyl's wings span out. Only its wings didn't connect down to its legs. They adjoined its body down toward the lower abdomen. Its head appeared to have very short horns that were only around 2 inches long. Its body seemed very muscular. It appeared to glisten in the moonlight, the way a person would if they had just got done swimming. Its feet had short claws on each of its toes, as well as its fingers. These are all of the details that I can describe in depth, as the memory is only 4 seconds long, and just after all of this occurred, I eventually fell back to sleep. The next morning, I remember saying something about what I saw to my father, and he told me that it must have been a dream. But to this day, I can honestly tell you that it was not a dream, as I remember it so vividly, and the image of what it looked like has forever burned into my mind. I've only told a few people about this, and they said the same thing, that it must have been a dream, but I'm still convinced that what I saw was not a dream. I've never seen anything like this again since, but I pray to God that I don't ever see anything like it again. Number 5. Flying Creature. Submitted by Vlad. Let me just say that some of the names have been changed for the American audience because those names don't exist in English. It was 1998. I was just 7 years old, and my neighbor Sven was only 6. We lived in Serbia, Subotica, a town farthest north and closest to the Hungarian border. At that time, Serbia was at war with Bosnia, Croatia, and the NATO started bombing Serbia. We were just kids, so war didn't really seem all that real to us, and we had the luck to not be bombed because our town was so close to Hungary. They couldn't risk a bomb falling into Hungary. We just liked to play all day and too late at night. One night we were playing outside. It was summer, as I said before. We lived very close to our town's train station. The train station used this old turning machine, we used to call it. It was outside of the train station and very near to our houses. It was basically a big round hole with a machine with rails that led to the station. They used the machine to turn trains that needed to go the other way or something like that. On that machine was a little house with buttons, levers, and whatnot that they used to turn that thing with the train on it. By 1998, it was already out of use, and we used to play there a lot. The hole had about a meter of water inside it, So we used to go out and catch frogs, turtles, and stuff we found. One night we went to play like any other day with one more friend. Let's call him Sebastian. We were always being scared by my older brothers. I had 3 older brothers, and Sven's older brother. They used to say there was a creature living there and we shouldn't play there. Of course we didn't listen, because we thought they were just scaring us, because they were sort of evil, like most older brothers are. That night we entered the little control house on that machine and we were playing Rail Guys or something. The floor of the house was made of wood. It was very old and looked like it couldn't hold much weight, but we were just kids, so it held us with no problem. As we were playing, Sven noticed something was walking on the train-turning machine. We all fell into silence to see what he had heard. We watched through the window of the little house, and we saw a big, hairy creature that walked on 2 legs. It was walking slowly towards the house. The thing had hooves instead of human feet, and it was dark, but the moon gave us some light to see enough. It didn't have any distinct facial features, or maybe it did, but it was too dark and we didn't see. It had very large arms, and it was carrying something. When we saw it, we were scared shitless. We were too afraid to move. I remember clearly thinking that on that night all 3 of us were about to die, and that the stories our brothers told us were in fact real. What we saw next shocked us deeply. The thing it was carrying looked like a body of a little girl, no more older than we were at the time. Then it stopped and looked around. Out of nowhere, wings sprouted out of its back. They looked sort of like bat wings, and it kind of jumped and flew off. When it left, we were still frozen with fear. Fear because we thought we were going to be the next to be taken. We waited 2 to 3 minutes to make sure it was gone. We opened the door and ran with all our speed and energy towards home. I remember I did not sleep at all the next few nights, thinking it might come back. After all, we lived very close to that little house, only about 100 meters away. When we told our parents about it, they naturally didn't believe us, thinking we had made it up or that we had very active imaginations. Sebastian never really got over it and even went to have therapy because of the constant nightmares he had after that day. It really affected him hard. Sven and I thought maybe we really did imagine it, until about 2 weeks later when I overheard my parents talking about a little kidnapped girl they saw in the newspaper. When I saw the picture of the girl, I felt a chill go down my spine and all the hairs on my neck stand up. The girl in the photo was the same girl that thing was carrying. She even had the same white dress. I told my parents that that was the girl we saw, but they didn't believe me. I showed the photo in the paper to Sven, and he confirmed what I said. Later we showed it to Sebastian, but he didn't want to believe it. He started his therapy a few days before and was kind of in denial of the whole thing. I sometimes think maybe we were overactive little boys who imagined everything. But how could we? We all saw the picture of the girl in the paper. It must have been real. I still live in the same place and have never seen that thing again. But still, when I walk around at night, I look up at the sky just in case, thinking I might see that thing again. But honestly, whenever I look up, I always hope I wouldn't see it. I'm 25 now and don't believe in ghosts and whatnot, but I can never forget that thing we saw that night. Sebastian was never the same after that. He even moved to Belgrade 2 years after that and went on to have therapy for his night terrors. It really got to the poor guy. I still keep in touch with him, but I dare not ask him if he remembers. I'm sure he does, but most likely thinks it was a nightmare or something like that. Sven is still my neighbor, and from time to time I asked him if he remembers. He always says, "How could I forget something like that?" I really hope it will never come back. I feel I had to tell this story to the world, because I owe it to that little girl. We could be an advanced intergalactic race spread across the universe, but there will always be strange creatures and mysterious beasts lurking around just beyond our sight. Think about how vast the oceans are, how the skies are endless, and the forests are dark. Sure, you can run and try to make it home before it gets to you, but the things that are out there will be inches from you before you ever know they're there. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to get your t-shirt today at darknessprevails.org. Thanks.